Yes, sir. It is that time again. The week 1 breakdown of stage 4 of the Call of Duty League. It's in the books, and my goodness, it was a crazy one. We had 6 debuts this weekend, 6 new rosters out of the 12 teams in the Call of Duty League, and a mix of some dominant 3-0s this weekend, some game 5s, just everything in between. So it was a really fun weekend, an enjoyable set of matches, and we're going to go through it all today. The debuts of the 6 different players, or the 6 different rosters, and talk about some of the biggest storylines from this whole weekend. So without further ado, let's get right into this one. Let's go. Alrighty, so let's start off with 2 teams who ended up facing off against each other, and of course that's Paris versus the Rokkr. Zaptius' debut on Paris coming from London, and MajorManiak's return debut to the starting lineup for the Rokkr. And there was a lot to learn from their match. Of course, Paris first played against FaZe in the first weekend of the whole, or the first match of the whole weekend, and they looked decent. They were pretty good. They took a map off FaZe, even though that map was standoff. So, you know, since it's a new map in the rotation, there's a lot to learn from that. And I posted a video about pro strats this weekend on standoff, so I highly recommend checking that one out after this video, of course. But at the end of the day, Paris was really needing some search and destroy wins, and so even taking a standoff off FaZe is definitely a great sign for them moving forward. They were 1-8 in their last 9 S&Ds heading into that one, so they desperately needed an S&D win. They find it with Zaptius in the roster, although the respawns really weren't that close. I mean, the whole FaZe roster just took them to the woodshed for most of that series, and you know, that's kind of FaZe's thing, though. You walked away from that series feeling at least a little bit optimistic about Paris heading into a Minnesota series against the debut roster there as well. Man, there's a lot to take away. It was a tough 3-1 loss for Paris, a nice 3-1 win for the Rokkr in that series. And again, though, the thing you gotta take away here is that, again, Paris wins another S&D, this time on raid against the Rokkr. It was just really tough for Paris specifically. They couldn't get a hold on any of those garrison hardpoint hills. It was really tough. Really impressed with the whole squad. During the S&D they played, they had some handful of moments I'm definitely gonna use for learn from the pros. They were insanely patient, and that's a great sign for a new team with a new player on the roster. And as a whole, very impressed with Paris in search and destroy. And then you head into control, and again, Paris just has not been that good at control lately. This is those 4 straight control losses for them. And so as a whole, you can't come away too impressed with Paris, especially considering what happened to the Rokkr later. So the Rokkr end up winning this match. They're coming off of a 3-0 against OpTic, where, yeah, you know, not an ideal situation there. MajorManiak definitely struggled inside of search and destroys throughout this tournament, which is ironic considering that was what they hoped to improve in the most, and they end up losing all the S&Ds they played this weekend. The glaring mistake against OpTic specifically was on Moscow. They gave up the P2 spawns literally for free. They completely lost track of their map control, and they accidentally flipped the spawns on themselves, spawning OpTic behind them, and just a massive mistake from them there. And so overall, there's a lot of inconsistencies still. They looked a lot better in the respawns against Paris, but you know, that's to be expected instead of a team like OpTic. To walk away from this weekend for Minnesota, where they lose both search and destroys, where they already hadn't been looking good, and they probably looked worse than before at this point right now in S&D, which again, it's a new roster, so you'd expect that over time they'll improve in search and destroy, but not an ideal situation. And you know, they walked away winning the respawns against Paris. They got 3-0 by OpTic. You can't be too inspired with this team heading into the rest of this week. And for you Rokkr fans, I wish I had better news, but I'm not sure they're going to be ready to compete for like a stage 4 championship anytime soon here. They're going to have a long ways to go, and they're going to be a team scrapping for COD champs qualification, like considering they're currently in 7th and Florida is looking pretty freaking good, who's only 10 points behind them in 8th now. So those are the issues that Rokkr have to consider. Of course, good news for them is that really the other 4 bottom teams in the CDL don't look that good either, with like Paris, Seattle, London, and LAG. So you know, we'll see. I think Rokkr should still be fine for champs, but at this point, it's hard to see a path where they could be very competitive during stage 4. Hopefully they can start ironing out these issues and really find their way heading into stage 5. That's probably the best case scenario for them at this point. Alrighty, let's talk Seattle and LAT. Obviously, Seattle had Classic debuting on this roster coming from Paris, and then obviously LA Thieves had benched Hook and brought in Tej to replace him once again. So they bring back their original roster where they made the run at the stage 3 major. And it wasn't the greatest showing from LA Thieves, even though they ended up beating Seattle 3-2. There was flashes of pretty good signs from both of these teams at points throughout this series. But I mean, for Seattle, it's the same issues again. They can't win a control. They're now 0-8 on raid control. And of course, that was a pretty comedic moment there with Maven really going ham, praying to the COD gods that they could win a raid control. I was a big fan of that, but I thought it was comedy. But at the same time, man, it's just so tough. They had every chance to win that series. They had a lot of chances to win that series. And again, Seattle just they lacked those clutch genes. They lose the 2-3-5 there, both S&Ds in the control, a series where in the hard points, they were dominant. They won the Apocalypse hardpoint 250-155. Then they won the Moscow hardpoint 250-150, looking really, really good. And there you saw a lot of really positive signs from all four of the players at points, especially from Pristini, Octane, and Gunless. And, you know, as a whole, Classic was basically exactly what we expected him to be. Just solid, pretty good. And that's what they needed, a consistent fourth player that could be very reliable, a guy that they trusted. And so they're right there with that with Classic. Again, I think they can still be really competitive. I see the upside for them in the sense of being, well, their upside's like a middling competitive team. I mean, at this point though, they're so far back in the standings. I mean, they would have to make an insane run from here on out to even qualify for champs. It would probably take them winning stage 4 or stage 5, which, I mean, the odds of that not looking great at this point, but you never know, especially if you just can't win controls at this point. Like, what are you gonna do, man? It's really tough, pretty mind-blowing. As for LA Thieves, you would have really liked to see a little bit more dominant performance here from them as a squad. I mean, bringing Tish back in, they should have been pretty comfortable with that, but losing both hard points, including a Moscow, you know, Moscow plus an Apocalypse, two maps you think they could be pretty comfortable on. Obviously, Seattle's been very, very good on Apocalypse so far this year as a whole. I mean, their S&D was really, really impressive against the Surge, where they looked fantastic on standoff. Venom was grabbing streaks, was playing fantastic, just really, really great early on. Then they head on to a raid and they dominated the raid. I mean, the First Bloods was what they were talking about the whole series, and I mean, that was the case. It was a really big time struggle for Pristini, which we've talked about so much on this channel, as Pristini's first bloodness, or his ability to be first blooded, is par to none. They got outslayed in the control big time and still won it 3-2. So there's a lot of those like really just clutch aspects of this team where they can make those big time plays, but it's harder to see the consistency right now. Not the greatest of looks for LAT. And as a whole, you know, there was no really standout performances. I mean, Kenny made some insanely clutch plays at points. I mean, of course, the control on raid was crazy and really intense. But man, I still have a lot of question marks about this team for sure as well. You know, we're not gonna do a power rankings video this week. We'll probably do one maybe next week again. But right now, they're still right in the middle there, probably at that 5-6 mark. Probably at 6 right now. You got like Florida and OpTic behind, you know, Toronto and FaZe and New York and all that. So they're probably hovering right at that 6th spot right now with Florida's improvement. It's not an ideal situation for LA Thieves right now either. You'd assume that they can kind of pick it back up and become pretty good again. But basically at this point, when they're not playing checkmate, they look beatable and teams are just vetoing checkmate against them. So we'll see. I'm just not very excited about this roster in the short term. By champs, I could see this roster really getting its groove back, but we'll see. I'm not convinced that Hook doesn't end up coming back into this lineup before champs. Nothing has been predictable with this roster up until this point, so anything's up for grabs. Alrighty, now London and Dallas, another two teams who had new rosters debuting this weekend as well, who faced off. So really fun matchups this whole weekend as a whole, but my goodness, we learned a lot about these teams. Nothing's feeling that good. Right now, it feels like a pretty solid top 6 in the CDL. And then at that point, you're like, you know, any of these teams could probably beat anyone. But overall, in this whole weekend, I mean, based off favorites or the odds, I mean, we only had one upset this whole weekend, and that was Florida beating Toronto. All the other favorites won all other matchups. So as a whole, it was definitely a pretty wild weekend, but all right, London's debut, their roster, of course, that's Afro and Alexx's debuts. And it was a promising start for them against Dallas. They ended up losing 3-2. Dallas won the series. It's definitely a tough situation. Again, Dallas got smoked 3-0 by the Ultra. It doesn't make you feel very good when you're losing to Dallas and then Dallas is getting absolutely bodied by a pretty solid team who also lost this weekend. You know, not a great feeling if you're a London fan, but The S&Ds went round 11. It was really, really close shots. He had to make some big time plays in the round 11 to clutch up. As a whole for Afro, there was some flashes of brilliance there where I thought he really looked impressive and made some big time plays, but it's hard to see the path to them being like a top 5 type team at this point. Unless Afro, there's still some unearthed potential there for him. Hey, I probably would have said that last year, ended up finishing top 4 at champs. So, you know, that you could be wrong once in a while, especially with a team like this, but there seemed to be some sort of disconnection there between the SMGs and the ARs. The ARs really struggled this weekend for them, both Shawnee and Alexx. With past rosters, those guys were insanely consistent, very, very good. And that really wasn't coming through this weekend as effectively. So, like, for example, like in the when London got 3-0'd by Florida, like Alexx went 14 and 27 on a Moscow hardpoint. That's a map that we have seen Paul do some nasty things on this year, and it just did not happen. There was some tough positioning from him. I still think there's a lot of work that they can do. Like in the Express S&D against Florida, where they pretty much just got smoked for most of that map. Like, you know, that's a map they looked pretty good on, and Florida completely exposed them there. And like again, like I said, they went round 11 with Dallas there, and they've been very competitive with other teams and beat other teams on that map before. That's why I'm worried for this team in the short term, especially where stage 4 feels like it's not going to go well in any way for them. Stage 5, still some upside there where I could see them working things out a little bit, but it's going to be tough for London for sure. So as for Dallas, definitely a lackluster debut for Vivid as well, man. I was pretty disappointed by the overall debut from him. I would have loved to see a little bit better like duo action between him and Shotzzy, where neither of them had very good weekends as a whole. And, you know, Shotzzy made some big time plays at points throughout this weekend, especially Search and Destroys, but man, inside of respawns, it was really unimpressive. And the struggle is going to be there for Dallas. You know, you go 3-2 with a new roster at London, edge that one out, but then you play against Toronto and get absolutely smoked. Again, when Toronto lost to Florida, who's one of those middling teams as well. So right now, it's pretty murky waters for Dallas about where they're going to be at, like in contention for stage 4. Doesn't feel very likely. But with the amount of natural talent that this team has, you can always see the path to upside or the path for it to work. But right now, there's just a lot of potential disconnects. Their timing seems really off with how they play towards hill breaks, especially inside hard points. And in control, there's still a lot of question marks with this team as well. So not that excited about this team right now. And that's probably going to be the theme for stage 4 as a whole. So now OpTic and FaZe. Obviously the hype going into this one was real. OpTic was coming off of a dominant 3-0 against the Rokkr earlier on in this tournament. And FaZe looked pretty good against Paris. They dropped a map though. So OpTic fans, I think, were pretty optimistic about this series with a chance to potentially dethrone FaZe finally. And yeah, no, it didn't happen, man. It was so tough. Formal set the record for the worst KD in a series since the start of the CDL at the beginning of Modern Warfare. 0.46 KD. Oof. That is tough. That hurts, man, for OpTic fans. FaZe looked insanely good again, bro. It's crazy. They are so much fun to watch. Their ability just to put pressure on hills. They trade kills as effectively as any team in the CDL. They're so patient when so many people think that they're not. They play so well together. There's just so many things that you just love about this team. I could do probably infinite amounts to learn from the pros on them right now with the amount of CoD, how well they're playing CoD. I'd imagine we'll do a learn from the pros from this tournament at some point this week. We'll definitely talk a little bit about what some of the things that FaZe did in this series, especially. Man, the Search and Destroy, like where I really thought OpTic at the start, like looked really, really good. They had some really nice setups. I liked their map control. They were playing really, really well towards the bomb site. And then FaZe started to catch on, and eventually FaZe kind of caught the rhythm of the match, and they were just making the right play call after the right play call, playing towards B-bomb, then hitting the mid push, playing the distraction towards A, rotating the back bomb back towards B. They were doing so many good things in that series, and you're like, man, they are on another level right now. They are not losing this. There's no way they're losing this. And then you go on to play a raid control, which, I mean, at that point, you're playing against FaZe. Good luck. It's not gonna happen. You know, the vetoes were a little bit weird for this series as well, and I was interested to see an Apocalypse map 4. So I was really excited and hoping to see the Apocalypse map 4 and a Miami game 5. So when I saw the map set, I was like, oh baby, I would love for this to go to a game 5 to see those two teams play on those maps. And obviously that did not happen. But Arcides again continues to be so clutch. He's been the streak machine for FaZe since basically the major. And it's been insane. Arcides is on another level right now. He's playing incredibly good Call of Duty. It's just so crazy, man. There's just the continued problems for OpTic where it's just like, you want them to play more patiently on the breaks. And then Insertion Destroys, you want them to be more decisive on retakes. And again, there's a lot of good moments where you're like, oh baby, that was an insanely nice play from the OpTic boys. And then suddenly you're like, what was that? Like, that was terrible. And so the massive contrast round to round or map to map is pretty surprising for a team like OpTic. Obviously, the slang is still missing against their best teams in the CDL, like FaZe, like New York, and Envoy had a pretty solid series. But besides that, all the other guys had their legit struggles. And again, FaZe continues to look about as good as you can look playing Call of Duty. So my word, besides that, this weekend, there's a lot of other things that we could talk about. Of course, Florida looked awesome. They beat Toronto in a really surprising series where Florida beat them on a raid hardpoint, which Florida had barely played this year. And so for them to win that against Toronto is a huge dub. And then you go into a standoff S&D. Florida looks really, really good. They lose map 2, they lose map 3. Ultra dominated the control, shocker. And then they go to a game 5 on Miami where Florida clutches up. So that's exciting to see for Florida fans. And then you go into a London match where you're like, okay, they just beat Toronto. So can they finally pair together impressive wins or solid wins back to back? And they finally did. They 3-0 London. And so at this point, Florida is a legit team that can make some moves. You have to be hyped about the contribution that Neptune and Havoc finally had together, which was something we've been really missing. Either one of them would go off, the other one would go off. Rarely were both of them having a solid game, or one was struggling more than the other, but that was not the case. They played very, very well. The playmaking ability from Neptune, which we've seen at flashes, was way more consistent this time around, where he continued to make some clutch plays. This roster is getting a little scary at this point, where they can really threaten some of the best teams in the CDL, and I like Florida's chances moving forward to be a legit top 4 type threat in the rest of stage 4. So that'll probably do it for the breakdown video. I know we haven't talked about all the teams, but we'll be talking about a lot of these guys in the video tomorrow, on the podcast on Tuesday, and hopefully in some more content this week as well. The community league starts this week. Be on the lookout in the Discord for more information about where you can watch matches. I'll be posting on the gaming channel, so make sure to head to the gaming channel, links down in the description, and turn on notifications because consistent uploads are starting to happen. A gaming video is going live tomorrow, so definitely check it out. I really do appreciate all the support. So like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you guys really enjoyed it. But as always, guys, I'm your boy Abezy, and we will see you next time. I'm out.